Afternoon, depending where you are, and a very warm welcome to the latest in the Russo-British Chamber of Commerce webinar series. To start with, I'd like to thank our sponsors, Raven Property, for making this happen. My name's Alf Torrents, I'm the Executive Director of the RBCC, and I'm delighted to welcome once again the British Ambassador to Russia, Her Excellency Deborah Bronnert, Judith Slater, Her Majesty's Trade Commissioner for Eastern Europe and Central Asia, which of course includes Russia, Trevor Lewis, Head of Department for International Trade in Russia, and Sarah Pilbeam, a consul at the British Embassy in Moscow, to today's discussion. And of course, thank you to all RBCC members and friends for joining us today. Before we get started, a few ground rules as usual to tell you how the webinar will run. After I've finished, I will ask the Ambassador and Judith to make a few introductory remarks. I'm sure you'll want to put questions to the panel, so please use the hands up function on the web, or use the chat room function as well, which is usually the best way to get your questions heard. The RBCC team will be monitoring the chat room and will try and pick out the more popular themes. Please keep your questions succinct, and it'd be very helpful if you type your name and company on your Zoom ID tag. We'll have everyone on mute, so if you are asking a question, please don't forget to unmute yourself. And then, of course, most importantly, mute yourself again once you've finished talking. As always, we'll be posting the recording of this webinar later on today or tomorrow, so you can listen to it again if you need to. Ambassador, it's about 8 weeks since we last spoke, which really seems a lifetime ago now, and so much has changed. I know one question uppermost in most people's minds is when people will be able to travel again for work. Would you mind giving us an update since we last spoke with business in mind?
Yes, thank you very much, and thanks, Alf, and thanks to the RBCC for organising this, and indeed to sort of my team who are also on the call, and we're obviously looking forward to all of the questions from all the people who've joined. So great to see you all. And I hope everyone is keeping well in these still rather troubled times. Yes, I know that travel is a big issue for people, and maybe I'll just go through and say a few words about what's happening in the UK, what's happening in Russia, bit on business, and then I guess Judith will want to come in and we'll have some questions. But just to say, from the UK, I hope everyone will be aware that there's been much better news. The UK has now a very extensive testing regime, but we've seen thankfully the numbers of infections coming down. I think they're now down just below 1,000 a day, and even better, we're seeing that horrible death rate coming down. So I mean, obviously all the deaths are dreadful, but it has been good to see that fall. That's meant that the UK government has reduced its COVID alert from a level 4 to a level 3. And that's why we're expecting today to see the UK announce some further relaxation in some of the restrictions, while still obviously asking people to stay alert, and some restrictions will remain. In the UK, it's throughout this, flights have been allowed to continue, and people have been able to enter the UK from other countries. We do now have a quarantine regime, or a self-isolation regime, that applies everywhere. We had one at the beginning that just applied to very high risk areas. We now have a general quarantine arrangement. And what that means is that if you're flying into the UK, regardless of your nationality, unless you are, an accredited diplomat, so accredited in the UK, it's not us here, or another a member of a small class of exemptions, you will have to self-isolate for 2 weeks. There will be a review of that, and we're expecting that on the 29th of June, the review, and there's lots of speculation about what might happen, but for the moment, you can fly to the UK, but you will be asked to self-isolate if you're not on that rather short list of exemptions. In Russia, of course, we've also seen a really impressive level of testing. In Moscow, the restrictions have lifted rather faster than they have in the UK. The infection level is still, well, in the whole of Russia is higher now than in the UK, but they are thankfully also coming down overall, particularly in Moscow, but they're still increasing in some regions. So we're seeing different approaches depending on where you are in Russia, and of course it's a huge country. Again, if you are able to enter the country, and the Russians are maintaining very strict, so they have had, they did close their borders in a way the UK didn't. But if you are able to come back, then there is a 2-week quarantine to those coming back. The Russians have just slightly relaxed some of the restrictions for people coming in, and we're aware that some non-Russian nationals have been able to get back into the country. So we will see you know, how that develops as the infection rate reduces in Russia, as restrictions are gradually reduced. We are seeing regular ad hoc flights to London, so if you need to leave, there are, at the moment we seem to have settled into a pattern of about 2 flights a week, usually a Friday and a Sunday from Moscow to London. As I've said, getting back in, the Russian authorities still have significant restrictions, although there are signs that may be starting to loosen. In the embassy, as you know, we've been here throughout, and we have, most of us have stayed at work, but we're doing so in a socially distant, compliant way. And we're now, I'm not wearing a mask now, but we are wearing masks and so on as we move around the embassy. You may have seen that the visa application centres are going to start gradually to reopen from the end of this month. Again, that will be a very careful approach, but that is in the expectation that the UK and Russia, you know, as the infection rates continue to improve, that air links will start to build up again, that restrictions on travel will start to be relaxed, but we're not quite there yet. But the expectation is that will happen over the next few weeks, and that's one of the reasons that the VACs are reopening. For the embassy, we're continuing. Obviously, COVID continues to be a huge part of our work, but now we are more focused on working with partners on a COVID vaccine. We were very pleased to see that Russia participated in the Gavi Summit, the Global Alliance Vaccine Summit that we hosted in London on the 4th of June. We're also talking with G20 partners and others about a global economic recovery, which clearly, looking at the forecasting, is something we all need to work together on. And we are very keen that we're looking at how we do that in a low carbon way, in a way that doesn't contribute to the next crisis of dangerous climate change. Our trade team is now back at work. I'm sure Trevor will want to say a bit more about that, and Judith is on the line too. But they are planning, but we are planning for things in the autumn, but we really will be very careful. So we're certainly not planning for major big physical events. We will take the best of what we've learnt in lockdown, I hope, and keep doing that and start a gradual, safe build up. We didn't have a Queen's birthday party. I hope some of you have saw that we did mark the Queen's birthday online, and you know, we will be looking at how again we build on that. I hope we'll be able to have a more traditional Queen's birthday party next year. In the embassy, I should say, we've expanded our team and we've brought in a new member of staff who's going to be looking at market access issues. I know that RBCC, AUB and others are doing this, but we're hoping to work with them. So please, if members want to come in with suggestions of things that they'd like us to look at, talk to the Russian authorities about, then we'd be very happy to do that. And you know, I know the team are very much hoping to build on last year's rather positive trade figures, where obviously this year is going to be much more difficult, but then looking at How do we build on that? How do we work with business to help continue to expand trade and illegal trade and investment between the UK and Russia? So I think that's enough for an introduction. Just keep staying safe, everyone.
Ambassador, thank you very much for that update. Judith, we will be able to hear you. We can't see you at the moment. Oh, we can see you now as well. Great. A very warm welcome. Thank you for joining us. Assuming you're still in Istanbul. Great to have you with us, and the floor is yours.
Great. Thanks. Can you hear me?
Yeah, perfectly well. Thank you.
Some issues with connectivity in this building. It's got very thick walls. So please say or send me a message if you can't hear me well, but I'll crack on while you can hear me. So that's great. Great to be able to join you again. Thanks very much, Alf. Thanks, Ambassador. You'll all recall that I'm Istanbul based, and I would ordinarily be flying back and forth to London and also around the region quite a bit, but I've been stuck here for the last 3 months. It's actually been very busy here with various tasks. Turkey is a strategic priority in terms of PPE provision for the UK, and also UK-Turkey free trade agreement negotiations are about to restart, or about to start in earnest after lots of preamble. So Turkey's also opening up quite fast for those who are interested. Turkish Airlines has flights back on, regular scheduled flights back to lots of places, including the UK. And our visa section actually has opened today properly, and the back here is open. So that's a big step forward. I've been staying in close touch with Trevor on what's going on in Russia, as I have with the teams across the region. I'm also very much in touch with our ministers in the Department of International Trade, much more so because of COVID, the new engagement system that the ambassador referred to, which is actually proving to be very useful in some respects. And as I said last time, I'm really keen to hear from you, from businesses, about what you'd like me to be saying when I have this regular contact with ministers in the Department of Trade. Very happy to take forward any messages you might have. I was slightly late coming on the call, so I don't want to repeat what the ambassador said, but you know, I can tell you that the getting the British economy back up and running is a massive preoccupation for the government. UK's been very hard hit. It's a very services dominated economy. It's a very open trading economy. So it's been hit very hard. You probably have seen that GDP fell by 20% in April, and the graph is very, very jaw-dropping when you look at it for that month. And of course, it will probably be equally bad when we get the sort of longer figures. But really keen to make sure that, you know, it's a V rather than a U in terms of the dip, if possible, and really wanting to help businesses like restaurants, pubs, cinemas, reopen, services businesses, and there's a lot of debate going on the distancing. Foreign investors are able to apply for some of these schemes to help businesses with the furloughs and that sort of thing. So Russian investors into the UK, if they've set up a business, are eligible to apply. I'm sure Trevor has been passing that on. A lot of emphasis on security of supply chains, lots of emphasis on investment also. There's a work going on with Number 10 and Treasury and the Trade Department to beef up our investment offer, given that there will be huge competition for the sort of shrinking amount of money that is out there looking to do FDI. So, you know, that's all great interest. DIT ministers, Secretary of State, still very focused on trade talks. US trade talks are up and running. EU talks, DIT does not lead on, but also you'll be following those, I'm sure, with interest. Lots of sticking points still there, which are being worked on. We've also launched trade talks with Japan, Australia, New Zealand in the last couple of weeks. And work goes on the one with Turkey, the one with Ukraine, looking at our region. Within our DIT regional team, we're working on how best to get on with delivering our regional trade plan, which Russia is an enormous part in this virtual setting that we now live in. We're keen as a region to continue with our focus on key sectors, energy, financial professional services, agriculture, mining, and also some of the new ones, or newer ones, digital. I know Russia is very involved with the work we do on that, healthcare, life sciences, renewables, and growing investment in UK investment in the services sector in Russia, which has been, you know, our contribution to that has been underperforming, and many of you, I think, have been contributing to that research that's been going on. And we've got a really exciting, actually, program of virtual events in Russia. So that it ranges from things like equestrian to waste management to mining to smart cities, and I could go on. So there's lots going on. It's really good that we switched to virtual activity for the rest of the year, and are cracking on with organising these events. So I'll stop there, but as I say, really, really glad to be here and really interested to hear what, from you guys, what the scene is like in Russia. Thanks, Al.
Judith, thank you very much for that update. We'll start with questions now. I'd just like to remind the audience, the panel are here to be asked questions, so please do take the opportunity. Use the chat room function or put your hands up if you want to ask those questions, but please do. I had a few questions sent in by email. First one is from Joanna Mitchell. She works in the education industry, Lumos Education, and her question is to the ambassador, and she asks, does the ambassador feel that the current situation will have long-term impact on Russian citizens traveling to the UK for education, both schools and university? And what's her impression of the feeling amongst Russian people about traveling abroad for education at the current time?
Gosh, thank you. That's a really interesting question. I think it's probably, to be honest, a bit soon to say how it will impact in the medium to longer term. Of course, immediately, many schools have been offering distance learning, and I know many parents have been finding that quite challenging, combining working and sort of supervising children at home. But I'm also conscious that certainly schools in the UK are getting back, and certainly private schools in the UK, I think are working really hard to provide, to both be restarting at the end of August, September, in the early autumn, in a way that parents can have confidence that their children will be properly both educated and taken care of in terms of the management of COVID risks. So I would hope that schools will actually demonstrate that they're working in difficult circumstances, but actually really, really well, and that parents can have confidence in using those, and the universities as well. I know that again, they're challenging themselves to think, well, what have they learned through this? So what are the things actually that maybe you can do better online? Can more things be put online in a way that actually enhances education, while also keeping face-to-face tuition and teaching as well. But I think in terms of, there's a bigger question about long-term travel for all of us, and I think it's probably a bit early to say, but again, I know that airlines are working very hard to try and ensure that passengers can have confidence that when they get on a plane, they will be kept safe, and airports as well.
Of course, if you've asked a question, you have a right to reply, so use your hands up function. But in the meantime, we'll move on to the, in fact, Joanna, is that, would you like to press the ambassador on that, or is that, are you satisfied with that?
Oh, no, that's great. Thank you so much, Alf. No, that's really useful.
Good. Okay, great.
Thank you.
Sarah, as always, there's lots of interest in the visa question. There's obviously a theme here, and maybe the ambassador will start, or maybe you jump straight in. But the first one is from Christopher Cook, from an agricultural company, Syngenta, and he says, what's the current situation regarding UK visa applications for Russians? And then a similar question, or a similar theme anyways. Dear Ambassador, thank you for the Facebook postings and webinars with the RBCC. It's good to see British Embassy in Moscow engaging with British citizens more than in recent times. As a frequent flyer possessing a business visa, I'd be glad to understand the current status of flights between the UK and Russia, and is there a time frame for these to occur on a more regular basis? Thank you. So to other theme, over to you, how you want to.
Shall I kick off on that? Alf, can I just ask, was the question about British people getting visas to come to Russia, or Russians getting visas for the UK? Because obviously,
yeah, I think the first one is Russians getting visas for the UK,
okay.
and the second one's more general about flights.
Okay.
How you do that.
So just as a general view, it is easier for Russians to travel to the UK at the moment than it is for British people to travel to Russia. So if you are, as I said, Aeroflot at the moment, and it seems to have settled down into a pattern, are offering 2 flights a week, I think usually on a Friday and a Sunday, sometimes on a Saturday, from Moscow to London. There are also quite a lot of other flights to other European destinations. So we're seeing 2 flights a week to Paris, I think 1 or 2 to Frankfurt, and some others as well. So going from Moscow to London is, you have to wait a couple of days, but is I think relatively straightforward. Coming back the other way is much more complex at the moment because of the Russian government restrictions on entry. But as I said, we have seen that a small number of foreign nationals on business visas have been able to re-enter the country. Because this is a tiny number, I think if you're interested, I would encourage you, this isn't being run by the British Embassy, I would encourage you to talk to the RBCC about it, who can talk you through what's happening. Alf, you'll correct me, but I think you're sort of working with AEB and others on this. Of course, we are raising this issue with the Russian authorities. I did that in my most recent conversation with the MFA, to make the point to them that they want to get their economy going again, and therefore starting to allow particularly business travellers back into the country is in their interests as well as in the interests of our nationals who want to come back in. As I said, on our visas, just for those who are interested, our visa application centres are scheduled to reopen next week on the 29th across Russia. What they will be doing first is, obviously when they had to close, we didn't, as you recall, have a lot of notice about lockdown in Russia. So the priority will be those who had submitted applications in the run-up to that and hadn't got visas, will be getting that backlog cleared. They will be doing their best to process things as quickly as possible. It will be a bit more complicated in the early days and weeks, just because social distancing and getting through that backlog. Just on other flights, my understanding is that both British Airways and Wizz Air, I think, have got published schedules starting on the 1st of July, but that is subject to Russian government restrictions. So we have seen on a number of occasions this has been pushed back. So as far as I know, and looking at Sarah, but these are still on their websites, but I think we would be cautious, and we are in close touch, and I think our expectation is that possibly in the early weeks these may turn into cargo flights rather than passenger flights, but we'll see. Aeroflot has been consistently advertising a restart date of the 1st of August. We are in touch with all the airlines, and we will continue to be in touch, and as things get firmed up we will put that advice out there, but I'm afraid it's still uncertain. And the UK government advice is there's still a general advisory against non-essential travel. That is again up to review. I would expect it to start shifting over the next week or so. But it hasn't shifted yet. So I think it's a watch this space one for the moment. But I would, if you're planning to travel, I would keep a close eye on announcements over the next sort of week to 10 days. Sarah, did you want to add?
Ambassador, thank you very much for that. Sarah, before I hand over to you, can I just add, because the Ambassador made some interesting points, and I'd just like to advertise the fact that, as the Ambassador mentioned, we are working through the AEB and the German Business Association to get highly qualified staff back to Russia should they want. So it's a general advertisement, I suppose. If you know of any British business people in that situation who do want to return to Russia, do let us know. And as I said, we're we're coordinating that through the other business associations. In fact, as you probably heard, there was a successful flight of or entry of about 50 German business people a week ago or so ago. There's another list pending, and we expect to hear a decision on that today or after the holiday on Thursday. And there's a couple of British business people on that. So if you are in that situation and haven't heard about these other schemes, do let us know. In addition, on the flights, of course, you can go through your embassy contacts, but we also have a good relationship with Aeroflot. So again, if you're looking to get back to Russia or back to the UK and are wondering about flights, do let us know and we can find you that information. Great. Sarah, sorry, over to you. And welcome.
Hi, thanks, Alf. I'll just echo everything that the ambassador has said. One of the biggest issues we've got with the travel advice change here in Russia is the fact that commercial options are not available easily to come back into Russia. So I think once the schedules start, hopefully sometime in July, I won't stick my neck out and say they'll definitely start on the 1st. But hopefully early July, that might ease it up a little bit as well and make it a little bit more straightforward for travel between the UK and Russia and vice versa. And that's all I would add at the moment. But we are updating the travel advice with any pertinent information. So if you haven't done, sign up to the travel advice alerts. And obviously our social media channels carry all the information on flights as and when we get it. So yeah.
Great, thank you. And Sarah, can you add a bit more about the opening of the visa application centre? Because obviously that's of great interest to many of our audience.
Yeah, so my understanding is that, as the ambassador said, that they will open across Russia on the 29th of June. There will be fewer staff in, so they will do what they can with the numbers they have going in. The priority will be the visa applications that were lodged prior to the centres being closed. There seems to be a little bit of toing and froing on whether the priority service is going to be available or not. I will try and get a definitive answer before they reopen on the 29th, and maybe feed it through you, Alf, so you can share it with contacts. But they're hoping to clear through the backlog as quickly as possible. But obviously, it's a brave new world with COVID-19 and social distancing. So we will keep it under review as well, because obviously the consular section and the embassy is getting quite a lot of inquiries just now as well. And we'll send updates as and when we've got them.
Okay, thank you very much, Sarah. Trevor, you look left out there. Don't worry, a few questions coming your way now. A question from Jim Roberts. We're continuing discussions with 2 Russian companies to supply advanced seals for industrial gas turbines. Apart from the slow pace of business, the banks are proving to be a major obstacle to developing payment routes. Do you see this improving?
Yeah, well, I can't obviously speak on behalf of the banks, but what I can say, as far as we're concerned, because we do have a UK export finance facility available for Russia, and it's one that I don't think is actually being used enough as far as I'm concerned. So it's there to help exactly in these type of cases. So if Jim's kind enough to share the specifics with me, then I can look at those. I think the issue around the specifics is UKEF will look at every application on its own merits. Who are the buyers? Who are the sellers? Who are the intermediaries, etc. But the facility does exist, and the UKEF sort of message on this is that no UK export should fail for the lack of financing. Obviously, you still have to have the exact detail to make sure you can deliver on that promise. But we're very happy to share the details with them. If I can get the specifics, I'll feed it into UKEF and then feed back to Jim separately. But that's also an offer, not just for in this case for Jim, but for any other British companies who are looking to export and think that financing might be the issue. Again, if they can share the specifics with us, the details, then we'll feed those into the system and hopefully get some positive news for them through UKEF and through the banks that they want to work with. Thanks.
Ambassador, would you like to add anything to that in the sense that that is a theme that is not new, and financial support for Russian projects does seem to be an issue?
Well, look, I think it's something that, as Trevor says, UKEF has identified as something that really matters. and I wonder if we need to, I mean, maybe this is something for Trevor and the team to think about, how we can give it more profile, so the British business community is aware of, you know, what is available and the potential. So, you know, we are looking, and this isn't just a Russia issue, we are looking more widely about how trade and exports can contribute to getting the UK and indeed the global economy moving again. So financing is going to be a really important part of that. But I think there is quite a lot that's available. Maybe it's partly sort of bringing people together and making sure that they're aware of what they can access.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, we can take that offline for sure. Another question, I think, for Trevor. Some Russian investors, sorry, this is from Tatiana Langridge. Some Russian investors in prime residential property have not been able to travel to the UK and view properties this year before the 2% stamp duty land tax surcharge for non-UK residents comes into effect in 2021. Is there a possibility that the transitional period will be extended in order to help stimulate the UK property market? Very, very technical.
Yeah, very technical. And I'd be extremely nervous about speaking on behalf of HMRC, as you might imagine. Yeah. But again, if Tatiana can share some more specifics with me on that, I mean, I've got the general points there which I can raise. I'm happy to look into that and see, because you say it's very technical and it's something that's been dealt with internally within government. But I can try and find the right people and try and get an answer on that. As I say, I don't know the details on it, but happy to look into it.
Great. Okay. A question for all panelists is from Frederick Mitchell from Global Counsel, and it is, what do you feel is the likely impact of the recent Arctic diesel spill on foreign investors' confidence in Russia's mining and energy sector? Ambassador, do you want to start with that one?
Sure. So I look, of course, it's a, you know, it's a horrible example of the impact, I guess, of the, you know, warming temperatures, rising temperatures, and the potential consequences, both in this case, but also elsewhere. And it's, you know, one of the reasons that we and others are hoping to talk to Russia about both climate mitigation, as well as a sort of, you know, positive agenda on climate change. I mean, I might leave it to Trevor to talk about sort of investor confidence. Of course, there are always business opportunities that come from this sort of thing, because, you know, the UK has some world-class expertise about how to respond to accidents, how to clean up the environment. But I guess in terms of investor confidence, it's more about making sure that you know that the companies that you're investing in have really thought through the impacts of, you know, increasing rising temperatures on their operations, and have got the right plans in place. But I imagine Trevor would be best placed to talk about some of the detail on this particular case and the business aspects of it.
Yeah, I'm happy to say a few words. I mean, obviously investor confidence will depend, you know, from company to company. I think it's important also to say that, you know, whilst this is obviously a terrible accident, you know, it's happened in Russia in this case, but we've seen similar things elsewhere in the world as well. So I think you have to put it into that sort of context. I think in terms of where UK companies might be coming from, we have been looking more widely at where we've got a green energy offer, and specifically around this, one of the organisations, institutions we've been working with is something called the Satellite Applications Catapult, which is a grouping of British companies. It's HMG funded. It's bringing British expertise together to see what our offer might be around the world. So in this case, one of the things we're looking at is there a UK offer in terms of long-term and to a certain extent real-time monitoring of the permafrost, because obviously in this case my understanding, without being an expert, is the problem was that the permafrost is melting, and that some of these structures were built on the basis that, you know, this permafrost would be there forever, and therefore those buildings were underpinned and strong. Of course that's beginning to change, so that's the kind of area that we're looking at more, where there might be a UK offer that can help Russian companies in Russia in this case, but also globally. So it's that type of body where the UK can bring that expertise together together and put together what I think we would consider to be a coordinated and coherent UK offer. And I say we are in touch with some people around this. Obviously, it's for the companies to decide what's the best thing for them to do. But in terms of where the UK skills are, I think this is an area where we have things to offer. Thanks.
Yeah. And I'll just add, Norilsk, obviously involved in that particular oil spill, have reached out to any British company that has expertise in the cleanup, in cleanup expertise. So if you know of anyone, you can contact Trevor or myself, and we can pass you on to the relevant contacts there. Great. Thank you very much for that. The next question is from Svetlana Minaeva. She's in the legal sector. She works for a UK-Italian company called Giambroni Partners, and she has asked, or saying, we're planning a short-term investment in the Russian market, or we were planning a short-term investment in the Russian market before the coronavirus pandemic set in. And we were wondering if you'd observed what sort of shift you've observed to the digital services in Russia due to coronavirus. I suppose that was one for you, Trevor.
Yeah, I think it's probably a little bit too early to say whether there's been a major shift. I think globally there probably will be a shift in that direction. I mean, I think just based on the stuff that we all know about people working from home. So the fact we're all here, on this webinar today is something that probably wouldn't have been happening 3 or 4 months, not to the same extent. So, and as I think Judith mentioned earlier on, as a team, as a trade promotion team, one of the things that we're looking to do more of is more online type of work. So I imagine other companies will be doing that as well. So I think there will be a shift towards digitalization anyway. It's also, as far as Russia is concerned, it's included as one of the national projects. So assuming that the funding for the national projects remains on stream, then I think that's an area that the Russian government themselves have already recognized as an area where they need to be doing more. And interesting enough, I think I mentioned one of these calls before that we've been doing some separate work looking at the UK offer in the services sector. So our share of the services market in Russia is 3.8%, whereas our share of sort of average share around the world is 7.8%. So there's a gap there, which we've been doing some work with one of the consultancy companies to better understand. And one of the areas that's come out from that, where we think the UK should be doing more and offering more, is in that digital field, in that ICT telecommunications field. So it's an area where we want to do more. And I think the fact that this report, this research suggests that there's a gap also suggests to me that that's an area where the Russians themselves, I say adding on the national projects, want to be doing more themselves. So I think if we can bring those two together, that works well for us. So in very short terms, yes, I think it probably is an area where there will be more of a move towards digitalization. And of course for Russia as well, of course, they've got very good human capital in these areas, some very strong companies, some very good skills. So if we can work with those companies and pull together some of the UK technology in our case, then I think that should be quite a nice mixture and very positive for the UK and Russia. Thanks.
Trevor, thank you very much for that. Before we go to the next question, just remind everyone this is your chance to ask the panel questions. Please afford yourself the opportunity. We have a live question from Leon Molchanovsky. Leon, your floor is yours. Please ask your question.
Hello?
Yep, go ahead, we can hear you.
Yes, good afternoon and good morning in the UK now. Last week, there was a conference in the UK on quantum computing. It's very technical and new science, and there is an opinion that it will be a revolution in telecommunications, internet technologies, etc. The UK has very deep expertise. Oxford, Cambridge, BT does a pilot. Russia has also a program, you may know, investing $1 billion into this. So have you had any discussions about this topic with any counterparts either in the UK or in Russia? Did you receive maybe any requests from private companies? This is going beyond university research now. So that's the question.
Thank you, Leon. Trevor or Ambassador, who would like to kick off?
So,
Well,
Trevor,
Trevor, you
yeah,
start.
certainly. Yeah, well, I mean, I think that the immediate answer to that, and the simple answer is no, we haven't, not specifically on this, on this sort of quantum computing. I think the one thing I would say, this is going back to some work we did in November last year, where we brought some very high quality vice chancellors over. Some of you were involved in the event from the UK. One of the areas that stemmed from that was where there was more of a need for sort of collaboration between universities, and stemming from that was also, I think, a very clear message that the Russian universities, and to a certain extent the UK universities, haven't been as good as commercializing some of this research. So that's something that we're already looking into anyway, to see where we might bring those things together, but not specifically on quantum computing, but very happy to look into it. I just got some notes out. I was just looking about some of the areas where the UK is going to be doing more things that are being looked at in London, and one of the clear ones there is around sort of the wider technology package, and I would assume that quantum computing fits into that. So there's definitely some work going on into that, but exactly what that will be sort of boiled down to, I can't really say at this stage, but happy again to look into it. Thanks.
Great, thank you very much, Trevor. Ambassador, do you want to add to that, or?
No. Look, I know that the teams in Cambridge, I think they're already quite international teams actually that are working on this, and they already have quite wide links outside of the UK. It wouldn't surprise me if they're already doing quite a lot of joint work with Russian counterparts as well as others, but I don't know the detail.
Right. Okay, thank you very much. The next question is from David Gardner. It's quite a long question. You've probably seen it in the chat room. I'll just summarize. Essentially, it's saying that on the 10th of March, there was a large delegation of Russian specialists from the regional councils to look at waste management technologies, an area which, as we all know, is of huge importance in the UK and in Russia, sorry, and quite controversial at times as well. They visited various cities in the UK, and whilst recognising the difficulties that have been brought about by the COVID-19, he's asking what sort of follow-up is planned for that, and how to give this important area some impetus, because obviously, well, not obviously, but it seems to be quite a good area for mutual collaboration. Trevor, I know you were involved in that.
Yeah, I was. I mean, well, indeed, we funded quite a large part of it. So, you know, clearly from that point of view, it's an area where we'd already identified there were some good potential business opportunities for the UK, which is also why, in this case, because a lot of the work we do tends to be a little bit too Moscow-centric. So, in this case, we were very sort of keen to sort of reach out to the regions, and we got a good take-up. I think, unfortunately, we lost a few people. That was the week when things were just beginning to happen in terms of, you know, flights cancelled and so on and so forth. But most people went, so it was really good. The feedback from our Russian partners was also very good. But in terms of what David's asking, I mean, the reality is since then, obviously, as we came back and as people came back, I think, in fact, from memory, I think some of the people may even have had to quarantine when they came back, is we haven't been able to sort of re-energize that work. But we've got the contact, we know the people, and now my team are beginning to come back into the office. So we've only got 25% in the office at any given day, but we are working remotely from now. So it's a good reminder to me to encourage the team to start reaching out and finding out where we go. We mentioned the webinars, and one of the follow-up webinars that we have planned is exactly around this waste management area, so that we build on the links that we've already got. So the team are already working on that. So we are doing some work on it, follow-up work, but not as much as I think we intend to do, and not as much as we would normally have done, given obviously the problems with COVID. Thanks.
Yeah. Thanks, Trevor. Judith, sorry, I hope I haven't ignored you for too long. You'd like to comment?
Yeah, I just want to comment on the digital point, that this is very much at the forefront of the government's mind in the UK. The DIT have been working with the Digital Secretary, Oliver Dowden, and he's actually speaking today. There's a UK tech cluster conference today, and he's going to be trailing the fact that there's a new digital strategy going to be launched in the autumn. And it's really, really important that the UK maintains its place at the forefront. And it's going to focus on digital skills, getting workers to transition, giving people resources to move into the tech sector. And also, he's also going to talk about the national data strategy, which is long awaited. So I suggest that we will look out for that, because there's been an awful lot of work in this area going on. So very much seized of the importance of this going forward, and I'm sure Russia will somebody will be really keen to work with. Obviously, there are complications working with Russia in some of these areas, but there is an awareness, and I'm always banging on about this, that just how digitalized Russia is. Moscow, one of the most digital cities in the world, etc. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Judith. We have another question. This is from Marina Kogan. She asked, do you envisage any collaboration on the issues of mental health and post-COVID emotional health of the population? Quite a general question.
Alf, shall I come in on that? So I think it's a really important question, and it's something that certainly the British authorities are doing a lot of work on. What the consequences are for different groups, whether it's children missing out on school, whether it's those groups who've been sheltered for a long time now, and what the consequences are, and what are the actions in mitigation. We have had some, we have had some contacts with the health ministry here, and obviously with Moscow City. I'm not aware that we've been talking about this, but it's a good thought. So that might be one that we take away. I know that some other authorities, I was talking to the World Bank this morning about some joint work they're doing, but are looking at the sort of wider issues around COVID and what we can learn together, both bilaterally as well as through in the auspices of the World Health Organization.
Great. Okay. Thank you very much for that comment. We don't seem to have any more questions. We have time for more questions, so please do ask them. Whilst we wait a couple of minutes to see if there's anyone wants to ask any final questions, I'll just ask the ambassador. Obviously, the much-awaited victory parade happens tomorrow. I know everyone in Russia was disappointed it didn't happen on the day. What's the UK's participation in it?
So thank you. So we, as you know, it was decided, I think 3 weeks ago. It was announced that it would be held today. So it's been fairly short notice. We were asked if our defence minister would be able to participate. I don't think that's going to happen. As you know, as I've said, we have a sort of global travel advice against all but non-essential international travel. So the bar for ministers travelling is very high at the moment. And there are obvious complications, both because of the UK-Russia bilateral relationship, but also because of the conversations around the history around World War II and some rather stark differences in appreciation. So I think what will happen tomorrow most probably is that I will attend representing the British government. I got an invitation yesterday. My expectation is that most other embassies will be represented by their ambassador. I think we are expecting that there will be some presidents from some of the former ex-CIS states, and I think the Chinese defence minister, but it'll be a much smaller number than was planned in May, and then that's because I think in part because of the reality of COVID as well as some other factors. Okay, great.
We don't have any more questions, so I don't know. Would you like to let's have a few final observation or comments from each of the panelists, and if we don't get anything else in during that time, we will call it a day. I'll start with you, Ambassador. Any final observations?
So I would say, look, our expectation is that COVID, regrettably, this horrible disease is going to be with us for a while yet. So whereas if you liked, we have moved out of the peak of the disease, both in the UK, also in Moscow, although not in all the regions of Russia. that means that our COVID will continue to be a big reality of our lives, both in the way that we're working, but also the priorities around our consular offer and restrictions on travel and so on. But we are sort of starting to move into a space where we are also starting to do other things. And clearly for I guess for the RBCC, a core part of that is looking again at, how do we inject momentum into international trade more generally, but also obviously in our case specifically between Russia and the UK. So we are looking forward to working obviously with the RBCC and others and British businesses in order to help move that on. I'm sure Trevor and Judith can say more about that, but it clearly will be a big issue for us in the autumn as we hopefully continue to be able to relax restrictions.
Okay, I will ask the rest of the panelists for their final comments, but we have a question from David Kant, former director of the RBCC, no less. David, over to you. David?
Hi, sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead, please.
Sorry, I thought I was writing a question. I apologize. Basically, yesterday, our Moscow General Director sent me a copy of the Mayor's decree regarding the opening of Moscow offices, and he made it very clear that I can't open my Moscow office with a full complement of staff. And one or two members of my staff have been quite vocal about not wanting to go back, which is fair enough. But in the interim, I'm seeing plenty of social media posts where social distancing doesn't really seem to be too much of an issue, which is fine. But I'm slightly puzzled because it seems quite an onerous set of regulations set out by the mayor for how companies might be allowed to open their premises, and yet at the same time, social distancing in Moscow would appear to be a thing of the past. So I just would be grateful for the feel, as it were, on the ground from you or any of your Moscow-based participants.
Trevor, would you like to start with that, or?
Yeah, I mean, well, as I say, I mean, obviously in the embassy, we've been, very strict in terms of what we're doing. As I mentioned, we've got 25% of people in at any one time, so we're being quite strict. I imagine most of the organisations, I have been speaking to companies here, and I know a lot of those are still working from home, British companies and Russian companies. In fact, I was trying to set up a meeting where they said to me, sorry, we can't see you, we're still not back at work. So I think, as far as most offices are concerned, they probably, or the bigger offices, they probably are following the rules and regulations. And I guess as far as the government's concerned, that's perhaps easier to enforce in a sense. I guess you can send an inspector in and, if there are too many people in there, you can take the necessary steps. I guess where it's not been adhered to, as David absolutely rightly points out, is on the street. So if I look out even before, when things were sort of much worse than perhaps they are now, sort of 2 or 3 months ago, looking out the window, there was still a lot of people walking around, a lot of people without masks on and so on and so forth. So I think they're trying to enforce it, but I guess in a city of this size, it's very, very difficult to enforce it on the streets and at events. But I'd also say that's probably what we've seen to a certain extent in the UK as well. So it's not just a Russia thing. But I think in the offices, obviously, there's a risk that if you break the rules and you get caught to be breaking the rules, you can be fined and sort of action can be taken against you. Whereas I guess if it's a big crowd on the street, it's much more difficult for the authorities to do very much about that. And we'll certainly see that, I imagine, over the sort of, the Victory Day holiday, tomorrow. But as I say, I think, as far as officers are concerned, and certainly the people I've been speaking to, I think most people have been responsible and have been doing their very best to follow those rules. I say partly because of the risks of not following them, mean you could find yourself in quite deep water. Thanks.
Yeah. So maybe if I can add from an embassy perspective. I mean, we are, as an embassy, we're not absolutely obliged to follow all the rules, but we are trying to, because clearly we don't want our staff to get infected at work. And I think my sense is that a lot of companies are taking a similar view, and certainly embassies across Moscow are taking a similar view. Regardless, we know that in terms of what we know about the disease, it's much harder to catch it outside if you're in the open air than if you're inside in an office. So I think it's probably partly people using common sense and understanding that being inside a room, they're much more susceptible to catching this horrible disease than they are out in the sunshine. But I think it's true. It's certainly my sense is, you know, if you go into shops, generally people are wearing masks and gloves, but it's not 100%. That again, I suspect that is true in many parts of the world with these restrictions.
Yeah. Thank you, Ambassador. I'll add as well, the RBCC is a business in itself, and we have to comply with the mayor's decrees as well. What I would say is that, you know, I'm guessing you're in a business centre, and obviously a lot of the responsibility lies on the business centre to get the building into a safe state. Our particular one seems to sort of complied with all the regulations and has actually remained open throughout the crisis. I agree. I've seen what you've written as well, and I agree. Often it's more a case of the sort of staff not wanting to go back. I think there's a higher level of suspicion about the figures, and I'm dealing with the same situation in that, you know, I feel that we've complied with all the regulations, and that the office is a safe working environment. Yet there's a certain amount of resistance amongst the staff. So, you know, my personal view is that there'll come a point where when push comes to shove, you just have to say we are opening, and you know, it is a safe environment, but it's a tricky one. Thank you, anyways, David. Before we go to the final, there was one more. Let me just see. That seems to be about it. One question for me, actually, from Robin Preston, asking if the RBCC are continuing with their trade missions. In answer to that, we are. Unfortunately, we had one planned to Pibean in September of this year. Interestingly, it is their oil and gas event, which happens a few weeks before the big event in Moscow. But obviously, Pibean, a very important area in that respect, the old oil capital of the Soviet Union, and still very much the main business there, that they are actually carrying on with their physical event, which is happening in the third week of September. We were meant to participate in that with a trade mission. Unfortunately, that won't be possible. We have no idea when the restrictions on travel will be lifted. But in any case, we will revive that in 2021, and all things being equal, we will participate in September next year in Pibean. Good. That now is all the time we have for. We'll just finish off with closing remarks. Judith, would you like to make any observations or a few last words, please? You're on mute.
A massive storm has just broken out here, so I hope you
Okay, we're good.
still hear me. No, I'm looking forward to working with it. I'm not on mute. Can you hear me now, Rob?
No, you're breaking up. Could you say that again, please?
No, I don't really have anything to add. All good.
Okay.
Looking forward.
Thank you very much,
everybody. Thank you.
Trevor, any final comments?
Yeah, I mean, just to obviously to try and finish on a very positive note, as you might imagine, just to say that obviously Russia is a very important market to us. It matters. I say, unfortunately, COVID to a certain extent came at the wrong time for absolutely everybody, because our trade figures were up by about 5.5% in 2019, and we're on upward trend for the last 6 months. So all looking good. So we want to continue that upward trend, support British business. And the message I always like to share, it's my sort of little marketing thing, which I like people to share if they can, is just that, you know, our sort of market in Russia is bigger than our market in South Africa, in Brazil and Mexico. I always reference those because people talk about those a lot. So, you know, Russian business is good, and we want to support British business even more. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Trevor. Sarah, any final comments on the consular side?
just that the consular section's open for business, so if you need us, UK and Russia is the contact details, and give us a shout for anything that you've got queries about.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you very much to our panelists, to the ambassador, to Judith from Istanbul, Trevor and Sarah. I'm very grateful for you participating, and I know the members and non-members really appreciate your accessibility. Thank you to all the participants, as always, for joining us. And the webinar series continues next Tuesday, 30th of June, where there'll be an economic outlook with Danny Thornley. Many of you know him, so please join us then. And my final words, just to thank our sponsors again, Raven Property, for supporting us and making these webinars happen. Thank you very much. Have a good holiday tomorrow, and see you soon. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Alf. Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you. Thanks, Al. Thanks, everyone. Stay safe.